Hello, everyone. I am delighted to have Elizabeth Brady with us today, and I'm going to turn it right over to her to introduce herself, and then we'll get into the topic that we always talk about here, respect in the workplace. Welcome, Elizabeth. So great to have you.
Oh, thank you for your graciousness in inviting me, Bobby. I'm thrilled to be here with you. By way of background, I typically go by EB, my initials, which is a long story of many moons ago being the only woman in a male environment where they did not want to call me by the very feminine name Elizabeth. But since those early days, I continue my career and I now work a very exciting portfolio. I am a college professor where I teach supply chain and ERP to biotech manufacturing students. I still consult because I love solving problems and helping companies accelerate their progress. And I'm fortunate enough to sit on two boards, one for Arima Genomics, a company that's understanding 3D spatial genomics, and another one, Noble Norman, that makes the stents that most of our parents have in their bodies.
Wow. Thank you, Elizabeth. I know nothing about those technologies, and I'm just in awe about the impact, positive impact that they can have on our lives. As we were talking earlier, I'm very humbled by what the biotech industry does. Thank you for all that you do. And I do want to touch on your opening comment about women in the workplace. It's been a journey. It's been a journey. And I've been close to many groups, women's leadership groups, and the ups and downs that I think we're still very much facing with the environments we're in. And just for the audience to say that I often say, especially for women leadership programs, it's actually really important to select senior male leaders to be part of that so that they can be advocates for the change, for the actions to be taken. Yep, I see you nodding. I thought you'd be with me on that. So for the audience, just wanted to say that it's definitely about us working together to first, of course, listen to the needs and the challenges faced, because I'm very sad to hear about that you experienced that you can't really own your name as Elizabeth. So yeah, but I'm glad you stuck it out and you certainly did well for yourself. So that's why I wanted to celebrate your win. And let's dive in, my friend. Please share with us what's your definition of respect in the workplace.
For me, it's really approaching other people with an open heart and mind. And not to sound too fuzzy about that, but it's to recognize that people have an inherent worth just by being on this earth. And I might not always agree with them, but I can create the space for them to express themselves. I don't have to try to shape or mold them into something I want them to be.
I love it. It's so simple and extremely powerful. And just let me check with you because I have a strong belief, and I don't know the science of this too much, but we give so much credit to our mind and our brain in business that we don't to the heart. In fact, many cultures really downplay it and call it the soft skills. I always say the soft skills are actually the hard skills. But specifically about the heart, I think there is science that's emerging that says it's actually another mind. It can guide us on what's right or wrong based on our inner compass. Integrity, I think, is a very personal thing. I can't judge another person's definition of how they think of integrity, but I think when we come with that human-centric approach to things, it just makes both business and the human-centered approach so much better.
I'll take you totally off track here and talk about being able to intuit things. I do not find myself a person with great intuition. I am very logical. I want the science and the data, but it has sprung up in two really interesting conversations recently. And I'm kind of coming to the conclusion that intuition is those unconscious data points that come into you and that you're having a visceral or physical reaction to it. So at some point, I want to explore that with you and get your ideas on intuition or this heart piece.
No, no, I'm so glad you brought it in. Highly relevant and I think connected. A quick example, right? I think I forget where it was quoted, but we see it come up all the time. Like, let's say a frail old person is crossing the street and they see a child in sudden danger of a car or something. there's something amazing about our human ability to do what it takes to save that life in that moment. Regardless of your ability, there have been examples of people who are even in a wheelchair that suddenly jump up and take care of what needs to get done. To me, that's so connected with how to run a company and a business that you've got to trust yourself. You may not always be right, but if you don't take that chance and risk, there could be consequences, both human and for the business. So thank you for that. So Elizabeth, let's get to what have you experienced that shows that a company culture is doing well on respect? What are some of those traits that you've experienced and see as now as you consult and even in academia, actually? Yeah.
Yeah. To me, it shows up when people are willing to take risks and when people are not concerned about always guessing the right answer. So maybe almost looking at the opposite side of it, right? An unhealthy culture is where people have information or thoughts and they're holding on to them themselves and they're hesitant to share for some reason, right? And so to me, when a culture is really working well, it's people are listening and then speaking, and you're building to a better answer.
I love it. I love it. There are two big things I'm hearing in that about listening. The term active listening is quite popular. It's a leadership competency. Many companies, train and help their leaders develop. I think it often gets misunderstood. I think the entry level on that is we don't interrupt each other. We really give people space and time to speak. But that's very basic. The more advanced version is, can I stop that monkey mind that's going on about my agenda and the next question I want to ask you and just be fully present to take in what you're saying and then take it from there. So thank you for that piece. The other one around what you were saying about being curious and asking questions, I often bring this in is I'm very grateful for Carol Dweck, the professor from Stanford, who did the work on growth mindset. And that's the way I'm hearing what you're saying is, there's fixed mindset. This is how we've always done it. And no, we're risk averse. And, there's a real risk of doing that versus growth mindset, which is curiosity and learning. And Satya Nadella at Microsoft is, I think, one of those poster childs in how he really anchored that concept in shifting the culture at Microsoft. I'm a Microsoft alumni, so I talk about it often. But briefly, right, the Steve Ballmer days, which were great, but the one thing that happened in those days were a know-it-all culture. People felt like, in order to show that they are bright and brilliant and leading, they had to show up as a know-it-all. Versus Satya has been shifting it towards a learn-it-all. I love that distinction of knowing it all versus learning it all, that we all generate and look at the results he's created with a business that's absolutely booming and growing. Yeah, the thoughts.
A beautiful, beautiful example of it.
Yeah, thanks. And thank you for already blending in when a culture doesn't have respect. So let's look at that some more. And if you're
Yeah.
willing, please share examples if, without naming brands, when you run into that. And, I'm most curious about once you see a pattern around that, what do you do next? Because a lot of us, I think, feel stuck and don't leave an organization for financial reasons or, personal reasons. Again, to the extent you're comfortable, please share the experiences you've had with the lack of respect.
Yeah. I think one sort of toxic, using another buzzword, toxic culture I was in was one where it wasn't know-it-all as you describe it, but it was who could talk the loudest and be the most dominant. It didn't matter whether or not there was good facts behind it or not. It was just overshadow everyone else in the room. And you could see what it caused within the organization. It was much more difficult to launch new products, which were essential to the life of the business. Because if the loud voice always wins, the right decision isn't always made, right? And so then people get frustrated, right? They aren't heard. They stop sharing their ideas. You don't move forward on projects. So it certainly took longer, cost more money to get a product launched, and often I will venture to say with less success, right? It could have been done much differently. in knowing what to leave. In that company, I had a senior manager working for me who was faced with that challenge. And the advice I gave her was speak your truth. If your truth is not listened to, right, then you have a decision to make. Are you willing to accept that and contribute where you can? Or you need to consider leaving. And I think the big part is in the accepting, right? You don't want to trap yourself in an organization where you're always rubbing against the grain. You either have to feel you need to get to a place where you can accept it and be okay with that culture, or you're just going to be miserable forever. And believe me, I've never had anyone leave an organization and come back and say it was a mistake, right? People always do just fine when they leave. It's going to be okay.
Percent. So well said, Elizabeth. And, let me tie, just like you brought in intuition, I think the other aspect that you're describing there is, are we tuned in with where our energy is? Like, do you get energized by jumping out of bed to go do what you're doing? Or are you so drained? And that whole TGIF thing, I've always shunned that because that's a bad indicator, right? That if you need to wait till Friday to decompress and de-stress in a toxic culture, that's a red flag. And then you're very right. These are tough decisions. Some people financially and for other reasons, these days with healthcare coverage and all that, can't make that sudden decision. But my invitation to those listening is at least give yourself the time and permission to consider your options, because exactly like you said, we all actually have choices and options to make. Yeah,
That's right. And sometimes it may take a little longer to find the right other option, but it doesn't mean you should not look or feel, and you should certainly not feel trapped where you're at.
absolutely. And I think it's also tied to the environment we're in with a lot of VUCA, volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity, that I don't have exact data on this. I mean, employee engagement numbers are, of course, one key one, but I do think there's data on how loyalty has dropped. And just as companies are making decisions to lay people off for financial and strategic reasons, employees should really think the same way is, don't stay in a job because the only person you really connect with is your boss. Sometimes that's a very good thing. Yeah, I know I've been there, but really do the strategic individual analysis to say, what's my criteria for what makes for a great work culture? How am I doing? Be honest with that rating, individually assessed, right? To navigate that, and then the timeline for any decision. Great,
Absolutely.
great. So, Elizabeth, let's get to your top tips before we wrap up for how to cultivate great cultures of respect. I usually say 1 to 3 things, but feel free, as many
Yeah.
as you'd like. Yeah,
The one thing that made the most substantial difference in my ability to help create a respectful work environment is actually meditation. And I did not grow up on the West Coast, but I'm very happy here now. When I came out here, everything felt a little woo-woo and just a little flimsy. But I had an astonishing supervisor working for me in the warehouse. And most warehouse supervisors are kind of chaotic, frenzied people. And this guy was so calm and peaceful. When I first met him, I thought, I'm sure his numbers are terrible. Like he is way too laid back. There is no way his team is performing. I go and look, and he has the best performing team of anyone. And as I get to know him, I find out that he just has this sort of inner balance, and it was through meditation. So I'm like, oh, wait a minute. If I can meditate and not lose my edge, I'm on board. So the big learning for me was actually meditation can give you a better edge at work and it doesn't make you woo-woo.
I love it. I love it. And especially because you got right down to the factory floor type of example, because that's another myth, right? Like, oh yeah, no, it can't, it might work for white collar folks, but blue collar and people in those high stress places, that's exactly where you need it. So that's such a great example. I'm so glad you had that experience. And the thing about the woo-woo is I'm hoping, I think I've at least experienced organizations globally, the whole focus on well-being and employee engagement is very tied to investing in employers actually offering ways for people to do meditation and self-care. rather than just a good to have. I think it's becoming a must have, especially with all the stressors and yeah, toxic cultures. So I'm so glad you had that. What else, Elizabeth?
And the other one is building a cohort of people who believe in good management, right? I had a boss once who said, if you throw one rotten apple into a barrel, what's going to happen? They're all going to go rotten, right? So you have to make sure that you're hiring the right people and bringing in the right people. But then within the culture, within the company, you need to cultivate this culture of respect and the one that you want.
Yeah, fantastic. And I appreciate the word cohort versus team. We usually talk about our leadership team, but the way I interpret cohort is clarity, alignment around, goals and commitments, and kind of that huddle of like, all right, this is where we're headed. That's what North Star looks like. Here's each person's part. I love that term and the transition of it, right? That it doesn't stay forever. There'll be moving parts, there'll be reorganizations, there'll be new players that come in. But that cohort approach is, I think, a great way to think of organizational structure. What else, Elizabeth?
And I think on the other side, when you start to think about joining an organization, I think you have to make sure there's that match up front because you're not, as a single person, going to be able to change a corporate culture. You can help enhance it, but as one individual, you're not going to flip it over. So I think that our job is to make sure we're hiring into the right cultures as well as looking for new employees to bring in. I look at people like you, Bobby, to help come in and convince a greater organization that there's a need to change, right? I don't think one insider is necessarily in the best position to do it. I think we need outside resources to help us align around a culture shift.
Yeah, thanks, Elizabeth. And, I'll speak to that a little bit. I think the value is being neutral and at the same time, really assessing the current state of an organization's health and then their desired future state, which includes that discernment around how much can they change, right? And so being realistic about that rather than my imposing a dream that I have for an organization, that's not realistic. I've got to meet them where they are and then have them, inspire them to aspire for where they want to go. That fits with, their trajectory. There's so many great case studies about that sort of stuff. So thanks for bringing that in. Anything else?
I think that's really the bulk of it. It's just living your true self every day and trying to make sure your true self today is a little better than it was yesterday.
Fantastic. And again, that's another buzzwordy one, but the way you worded it is so beautiful that, many HR departments celebrate the bring your whole self to work, but really it's about the true self. Is, do we create safe space for people to bring their best work, including being able to out themselves and say, I don't do very well at this, and this is going to be a challenge, but I'm willing to learn and grow is fantastic. Well, Elizabeth, I'm so honored to have you as a guest. Thank you for all that you do and what you take forward into the world and the amazing positive impact you're having on so many people you touch. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for creating this opportunity.